I was folding my favorite flannel shirts for my Lake Erie fishing trip when the phone rang. Carmen, my daughter-in-law, sounded breathless and urgent. "Tony, I need you to put a hidden camera in your living room and leave the apartment right now." Her voice trembled like she was scared of something. "It's to protect the family, but I can't explain over the phone." Marcus agrees this is necessary. My gut told me something was terribly wrong. But when family calls for help, you don't ask too many questions. I agreed, wondering what kind of trouble could require such secrecy. The electronics store clerk looked at me funny when I asked for a small wireless camera that could hide behind picture frames. "Security system upgrade," I muttered, feeling like I was lying even though I wasn't sure what the truth was anymore. The young man sold me something no bigger than a matchbox that could stream video to my laptop anywhere with internet connection. Back home, I positioned the tiny device behind the family photo on my mantelpiece, the one showing Helen and me at our 25th wedding anniversary. My hands shook a little as I adjusted the angle to capture most of the living room. This was the room where Helen and I had watched television together for 30 years, where we'd opened Christmas presents with Marcus when he was little, where she'd taken her last breath on the hospital bed we'd set up by the window. Carmen arrived just as I finished the installation. She kept checking the windows, pulling curtains slightly apart to peer outside, then letting them fall back. Her usual confident demeanor had been replaced by nervous energy that made my stomach churn. "You're sure this is necessary?" I asked, studying her face for clues. "Absolutely," she said, still not meeting my eyes. "Marcus will handle everything while you're gone. Just enjoy your vacation and don't worry about the house." The drive to my cabin rental near Port Clinton took 2 hours, but my mind stayed back in Columbus the whole time. I'd built that house with my own hands in 1978, right after Marcus was born. Every board, every nail, every coat of paint held memories of the life Helen and I had created together. The idea that it needed some kind of surveillance protection felt wrong, like wearing shoes in church. I set up my laptop on the cabin's small kitchen table and logged into the camera feed. The living room appeared on my screen in grainy black and white, empty except for familiar furniture and shadows from the late afternoon sun filtering through Helen's lace curtains. The next morning, I was sipping coffee and watching boats on the lake when movement on my laptop screen caught my attention. Carmen entered the living room, but she wasn't alone. Behind her walked an older woman in a business suit carrying a clipboard and measuring tape. A younger man followed them, holding what looked like an inspection flashlight and some kind of electronic device. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips as I watched the strangers begin examining my house like they owned it. The woman measured walls while the man tested electrical outlets and examined the baseboards. Carmen pointed out details about the crown molding, the hardwood floors Helen had insisted we install, even the antique grandfather clock that had belonged to Helen's mother. "The location is prime," Carmen said to the woman, her voice clear through the laptop speakers. "Walking distance to the elementary school, established neighborhood, mature trees. The owner is elderly and needs to downsize soon." The word downsize hit me like a punch to the chest. These weren't family, friends, or repair people. They were strangers evaluating my home like merchandise. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The man with the flashlight knelt by the foundation wall, running his hands along the baseboard. "Structure's solid," he said. "Good bones. Plumbing might need updating, but nothing major. I'd estimate fair market value around $400,000, maybe $425 with the right staging." Carmen nodded enthusiastically. "That's what we hope to hear. The timeline needs to be fast, though. How quickly can you have everything ready?" "Give me a week for the full inspection report," the woman replied. "Bradley can start on the minor repairs immediately if needed." I slammed the laptop shut and stared out at Lake Erie, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My son's wife was showing my house to what appeared to be a real estate appraiser and contractor, discussing my need to downsize like it was already decided, without my knowledge. While I was safely out of the way on vacation, the betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. This was the house where I'd carried Helen over the threshold as a young bride, where I'd paced the floors when Marcus had colic as a baby, where I'd held her hand during her final days with cancer. And somehow, while I was grieving and trying to figure out how to live without her, Plans were being made to take it away from me. I opened the laptop again, hands trembling with anger and disbelief. The three strangers continued their evaluation, measuring windows and discussing market positioning, while Carmen provided details about neighborhood amenities and recent comparable sales. She spoke about my home and my life like she was reading from a real estate brochure, cold and calculating. Marcus appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped with hope that my son would put a stop to this madness. Instead, he shook hands with both strangers and joined their conversation about timeline and getting the paperwork ready. "Dad won't be back until Sunday," Marcus said. "That gives us 4 more days to handle the preliminary steps." I felt like I was watching my family dissolve through a computer screen, powerless to stop it from 60 miles away. I spent that night pacing the cabin's small living room, unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to think about anything except the conspiracy I'd witnessed in my own home. By dawn, I was back at the laptop, watching the camera feed like it might somehow explain how my life had turned upside down overnight. Around 10 o'clock, Carmen returned to the house with a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Helen and I had shared thousands of meals, where I'd helped Marcus with homework, where we'd planned family vacations and discussed dreams for the future. "The preliminary documents are ready for signature," the man said, opening his briefcase and spreading papers across the table. "Since Anthony's cognitive decline has been documented by Dr. Williams, the power of attorney transfer should be straightforward." Cognitive decline? I'd never heard of Dr. Williams in my life. My mind raced back through recent months, trying to remember any doctor visits or medical appointments. Then it hit me. Carmen had insisted on taking me to several wellness checkups after Helen died, claiming she wanted to make sure I was staying healthy during my grief. I'd assumed she was being thoughtful and caring. "The medical reports confirm early-stage dementia, with episodes of confusion and memory loss," Carmen said, her voice steady and businesslike. Dr. Williams documented 3 separate incidents of Anthony forgetting recent conversations and becoming disoriented about time and place. I stared at the screen in horror. Not only were these complete lies, but Carmen was describing symptoms I'd never experienced. My memory was sharp as ever. I could remember every detail of building this house, every birthday party we'd thrown for Marcus, every anniversary dinner Helen and I had shared. The only confusion I felt was watching my family plot against me. Marcus entered the kitchen, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing as Carmen and the lawyer discussed my alleged mental incompetence. "He's been getting worse since Helen died," Carmen continued. "Sometimes he calls me Helen by mistake, or asks when she's coming home. Yesterday he left the stove on for hours and couldn't remember cooking anything." More lies. I had never called Carmen by my wife's name, never left appliances running, never shown any signs of the declining mental state they were describing. But as I watched them build this fictional narrative about my condition, I realized how cleverly they'd planned this scheme. "The power of attorney documents give Marcus full authority over his father's financial and medical decisions," the lawyer explained. "Once signed and notarized, you'll be able to proceed with the house sale, manage his bank accounts, and make arrangements for appropriate long-term care." My bank accounts. I grabbed my wallet and found the debit card for the checking account where Helen and I had kept our savings. Last time I'd checked, there was about $12,000, enough to cover several months of expenses while I figured out my future without her. I'd added Marcus to the account years ago, just in case of emergency, never imagining he'd use that access to steal from me. The lawyer produced a notary seal and stamp. Within minutes, documents were being signed and sealed that would give my son complete control over everything I owned. Marcus signed his name with a shaky hand, glancing toward the camera once as if he could feel me watching him. "The house appraisal confirms a value of $415,000, Carmen said. "After paying off the mortgage balance and closing costs, the net proceeds should be around $370,000. That's more than enough to cover the nursing home placement and provide long-term care funding." Nursing home placement. The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. They weren't just stealing my money and property. They were planning to warehouse me in some institutional care facility, probably claiming it was for my own good due to my documented mental decline. I thought about Helen's final weeks, When we discussed what would happen to me after she was gone, she'd made me promise not to give up on life, not to let anyone convince me I was too old or too weak to live independently. "You're the strongest man I know, Tony," she'd whispered during one of our last conversations. "Don't let anyone make you feel helpless." Watching Carmen and Marcus plan my future without my knowledge or consent, I felt Helen's words strengthening my resolve. I wasn't helpless, and I wasn't suffering from dementia. I was a 65-year-old retired construction foreman who'd built houses, raised a family, and survived the loss of his life partner. I had enough fight left in me to protect what Helen and I had built together. The lawyer finished packing his papers and shook hands with Carmen and Marcus. "I'll file these with the court tomorrow," he said. "The emergency guardianship hearing is scheduled for Monday morning, which should give you legal authority to make all necessary decisions about Anthony's care and property." Monday morning. That was the day after I was supposed to return from vacation. They'd timed everything perfectly, planning to ambush me with legal papers and medical claims the moment I walked through my front door. As I watched them celebrate their successful deception, I realized this wasn't just about money or property. This was about my dignity, my independence, my right to make decisions about my own life. They were treating me like a problem to be solved, rather than a human being who deserved respect and honesty. I closed the laptop and stepped out onto the cabin's small deck, overlooking Lake Erie. The water stretched to the horizon, vast and unchanging, reminding me of the permanence I'd felt building my life with Helen. We'd weathered storms before. We'd faced challenges and found ways to overcome them together. Now I had to find the strength to face this challenge alone, but not defenseless. Helen always said that when people show you who they really are, you should believe them. Carmen and Marcus had just shown me exactly who they were and exactly what they thought of me. Now it was time to show them what a supposedly declining old man could do when his back was against the wall. I drove into town and found a payphone outside the Port Clinton police station. Something about using my cell phone felt risky now that I knew Carmen and Marcus were capable of such elaborate deception. For all I knew, they might be monitoring my calls or tracking my location. My first call was to Dr. Stevens, my actual physician who'd been treating me for 15 years. His receptionist confirmed I had no appointments scheduled with anyone named Dr. Williams, and my medical records showed no documentation of cognitive decline or dementia symptoms. "Mr. Hartley, your last visit was 6 months ago for routine blood work," she said. "All your test results were normal for a man your age. Dr. Stevens noted that you seem to be coping well with your wife's passing, all things considered." My second call was to Detective Mike Rogers, an old friend from my construction days who'd helped me build a deck on his house 10 years ago. Mike had joined the police force after retiring from his electrician job, and he'd always told me to call if I ever needed help. "Tony, good to hear from you," Mike said when I explained who was calling. "What's going on?" I gave him a quick summary of what I'd discovered through the hidden camera. Mike listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification about names and dates. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This sounds like elder abuse," he finally said. "Financial exploitation combined with false medical claims. Problem is, if they've got forged documents and fake medical records, it's going to be hard to prove without solid evidence. Tell me about this, Dr. Williams." I described the medical appointments Carmen had arranged, how she'd insisted on driving me and waiting outside the examination rooms. She said she was coordinating my care with my regular doctor, making sure all my physicians were communicating about my health. "But you never actually saw Dr. Stevens during these appointments?" "No." Carmen said Dr. Williams was a specialist in grief counseling and geriatric mental health. She claimed Dr. Stevens had referred me for additional evaluation after Helen died. Mike's silence stretched long enough that I started to worry the connection had been lost. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, more professional and concerned. "Tony, I'm going to do some checking on this Dr. Williams character. In the meantime, I need you to be very careful about what you say to Carmen and Marcus. If they're running a con this elaborate, they're probably prepared for the possibility that you might figure it out." After hanging up, I drove back to the cabin and reluctantly opened the laptop again. The camera feed showed an empty living room, but I could hear voices from the kitchen. I adjusted the volume and caught fragments of a phone conversation Carmen was having. "The documents are filed," she was saying. Dr. Williams assured me his medical evaluation will hold up to scrutiny. He's done this before. Done this before. My blood ran cold as I realized this might not be Carmen's first attempt at elder abuse fraud. She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd perfected a system, not someone improvising a desperate plan. Marcus appeared on camera, pacing nervously through the living room. He kept checking his phone and looking toward the kitchen where Carmen was still talking. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw signs that my son might be having second thoughts about their scheme. When Carmen finished her phone call and joined Marcus in the living room, their conversation became clearly audible through the laptop speakers. "I don't like lying about Dad's mental condition," Marcus said, his voice strained. "He's grieving, Mom, but he's not losing his mind. What if someone figures out the medical reports are fake?" Carmen moved closer to Marcus, her tone shifting to something softer and more persuasive. "Baby, your father is going to be fine. The nursing home we selected has excellent care, and he'll have round-the-clock medical attention. This way he won't have to worry about maintaining the house or managing finances. We're actually doing him a favor by stealing his house and lying about his health, by protecting him from making poor decisions while he's grieving. Older people become vulnerable after losing a spouse. They make impulsive choices, get taken advantage of by scammers. We're his family. We're supposed to look out for him." I watched Carmen manipulate my son with the same skill she'd used to manipulate me. Her arguments sounded reasonable if you didn't know the truth behind them. She was repositioning theft and fraud as compassionate family care, making Marcus feel like they were heroic rather than criminal. "The house is too big for him anyway," Carmen continued. "All those memories of Helen everywhere. It's not healthy for him to stay there. A change of environment will be good for his emotional recovery." Marcus nodded slowly, but I could see uncertainty in his posture. "What about the money from selling the house? $370,000 is a lot. It'll go into a trust fund for his care. If anything's left over after he passes away, it'll be our inheritance anyway. This way, we're just managing his assets responsibly instead of waiting for him to make mistakes with them." The casual way Carmen discussed my death and their inheritance made my stomach turn. She'd reduced my entire life to a financial transaction, calculating profit margins on my family's future grief. My phone rang, startling me back to reality. It was Mike Rogers calling back. "Tony, I've got some disturbing news about your Dr. Williams," he said without preamble. "There's no licensed physician by that name in Ohio. I ran the name through our database and found a Dennis Williams who works as a medical technician at a clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. He's got a history of document fraud and was investigated for creating fake medical records 2 years ago." "Florida?" I repeated, trying to understand the connection. "I did some more digging on your daughter-in-law. Carmen Rodriguez attended nursing school in Jacksonville before moving to Ohio. I'm guessing she and Williams knew each other from her time down there." Rodriguez. I'd always known Carmen by her married name, Carmen Hartley. Learning her maiden name somehow made the betrayal feel even more personal, like she'd been hiding her true identity along with her true intentions. "There's more," Mike continued. "I contacted a colleague in Jacksonville who remembers the Williams case. He was creating fake diagnoses for insurance fraud, working with a group of people who targeted elderly patients for financial exploitation. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Carmen hadn't stumbled into this scheme or made desperate decisions under pressure. She'd brought experience and criminal connections to her marriage with Marcus, planning from the beginning to exploit our family's vulnerabilities. "What can I do?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of their deception. "First, don't confront them directly. If they know you're aware of their plan, they might accelerate the timeline or destroy evidence. Second, keep recording everything through that camera. We need documentation of their conspiracy. Third, get yourself a medical evaluation from a legitimate doctor who can testify about your mental competence." After Mike hung up, I sat staring at the lake, trying to process how completely I'd misjudged my son's wife. I'd welcomed Carmen into our family, trusted her with access to our home and finances, believed her expressions of concern for my well-being after Helen died. Every kind gesture, every offer to help, every sign of caring had been calculated manipulation designed to position herself for this theft. But as angry as I felt toward Carmen, my heartbreak centered on Marcus. My son was actively participating in a plan to steal my home and commit me to a nursing home based on lies. Whether he was a willing conspirator or just a weak man being manipulated by a criminal wife, the result was the same. My own child was betraying everything our family had built together. I thought about calling Marcus directly, trying to appeal to whatever love and loyalty might still exist in our relationship. But Mike's warning echoed in my head. If I revealed what I knew too early, I might lose any chance of stopping them and protecting other potential victims of Carmen's future schemes. The sun was setting over Lake Erie, painting the water in shades of orange and red that reminded me of the sunsets Helen and I used to watch from our back porch. She'd always said that even the most beautiful things in life were temporary, but that didn't make them less precious. Our marriage, our home, our family had been beautiful things worth protecting. Now it was time to fight for what remained of that beauty, even if it meant going to war with my own son. I called Mike Rogers again the next morning, unable to sleep after spending the night researching elder abuse cases on the cabin's spotty internet connection. What I'd learned kept me awake, pacing and planning until dawn. Mike, I need to ask you about something. Are there networks of people who specialize in this kind of fraud? Because what Carmen's doing seems too organized for a first-time scam. Funny you should mention that, Mike said. I spent yesterday evening making calls to other departments in Ohio and neighboring states. Your Carmen Rodriguez has an interesting history. He paused, and I heard papers rustling in the background. She was married to a 72-year-old widower named Frank Peterson in Toledo 3 years ago. Peterson's children tried to contest a guardianship petition that claimed their father had dementia and needed institutional care. Before they could prove the medical reports were fake, Peterson died of a heart attack in the nursing home. My hands went numb around the phone. Died, natural causes, according to the death certificate. But here's the interesting part. Carmen inherited Peterson's house and life insurance, then disappeared within a month of his death. The Peterson children hired a private investigator, but she'd covered her tracks too well. I felt sick, imagining myself in Frank Peterson's place, trapped in a nursing home, watching everything I'd worked for stolen by the woman I'd trusted. How did she meet Marcus? That's where it gets complicated. She started attending a grief counseling group at Street Marks Catholic Church in Columbus about 4 months after Peterson died. Your son was in the same group, dealing with his mother's death. The manipulation ran even deeper than I'd imagined. Carmen hadn't randomly met Marcus and fallen in love. She'd specifically targeted him because he was a grieving son with access to an aging father's assets. Our family's pain had made us perfect victims for her calculated exploitation. Mike, there's something else. I've been watching the camera feed, and they're planning some kind of legal action for Monday morning. Emergency guardianship, they called it. That fits the pattern. Emergency guardianship allows them to bypass normal court procedures by claiming you're in immediate danger due to mental incapacity. If they can get a judge to sign the papers, they'll have legal authority to control your finances and living situation within hours. How is that possible? Shouldn't I have a chance to defend myself? In theory, yes. But if they've got medical documentation and witness testimony about your declining condition, and if you're not present to contest their claims, a judge might grant temporary guardianship to protect your welfare. I realized they were planning to ambush me the moment I returned from vacation, probably with police escort and court papers already signed. By the time I understood what was happening, I'd be legally powerless to stop them. What can we do? I asked, hearing the desperation in my own voice. We need to beat them at their own game. I'm going to contact Detective Sarah Mitchell from the Financial Crimes Unit. She specializes in elder abuse cases and has experience dealing with sophisticated fraud networks. But Tony, I need you to understand something. Even if we can prove Carmen's criminal background and expose the fake medical reports, Marcus is still your son. He's going to face serious legal consequences for his role in this conspiracy. The weight of that reality settled over me like a heavy blanket. Stopping Carmen meant destroying Marcus's life, but letting them proceed meant losing everything Helen and I had built together, possibly including my freedom and independence. I spent the afternoon monitoring the camera feed while waiting for Detective Mitchell to call back. Around 3 o'clock, Carmen and Marcus returned to the house with a woman I didn't recognize. She carried official-looking paperwork, and introduced herself as Mrs. Franklin from Adult Protective Services. I received a report that Anthony Hartley has been exhibiting signs of cognitive decline and may be living in unsafe conditions, Mrs. Franklin said, settling into Helen's favorite armchair with her clipboard and forms. Carmen launched into a detailed description of my supposed mental deterioration, describing incidents that had never happened and symptoms I'd never displayed. He called me 3 times last week, asking when Helen was coming home from the hospital. When I reminded him that she died 6 months ago, he became confused and upset. Marcus nodded along with Carmen's lies, adding his own fictional observations about my forgetfulness and disorientation. Sometimes he starts projects around the house and forgets what he was doing. Last month I found him in the garage at 2 a.m, claiming he was looking for Christmas decorations in July. Mrs. Franklin took detailed notes while they built their case against my competency. Has he had any recent medical evaluations? Dr. Williams has been monitoring his condition, Carmen said, producing a folder full of what I now knew were forged medical records. The reports confirm early-stage dementia with episodes of confusion about time and place. Dr. Williams recommended institutional care, but Anthony refuses to discuss it. That's common with dementia patients, Mrs. Franklin replied. They often resist help because they don't recognize their own limitations. The family sometimes has to make difficult decisions to protect their safety. I watched in horror as my life was being rewritten by people who claimed to love me. Every kindness I'd shown Carmen, every trust I'd placed in Marcus, every vulnerability I'd revealed during my grief over Helen was being weaponized against me. Mrs. Franklin completed her forms and handed copies to Carmen. Based on this documentation and your testimony, I'm recommending immediate intervention. The emergency guardianship petition should be approved without difficulty. What happens after the guardianship is granted? Marcus asked. You'll have legal authority to make all decisions about your father's care and finances. Given his condition, residential care seems appropriate. I can provide recommendations for facilities that specialize in dementia patients. They discussed nursing homes and care facilities like they were choosing a hotel for a vacation, comparing amenities and costs with casual efficiency. Carmen asked about memory care units and security features to prevent wandering, as if I were already a lost and confused old man who needed to be contained for my own protection. When Detective Mitchell finally called back, I was ready with a detailed summary of everything I'd witnessed and learned. She listened carefully, asking specific questions about timelines and documentation. Mr. Hartley, this is definitely a sophisticated elder abuse scheme, she said when I finished. Carmen Rodriguez fits the profile of what we call a black widow predator. They target vulnerable elderly men, often through churches or grief counseling groups, then use romantic relationships to gain access to assets. What about my son? Is he a victim too? Or is he complicit? That's harder to determine. Some family members get manipulated into participating, especially when the predator convinces them they're acting in their loved one's best interests. Others are willing partners who see an opportunity for financial gain. Detective Mitchell explained that they needed solid evidence to break up the conspiracy and protect me from the legal trap being set for Monday morning. We're going to coordinate with the court system to flag the emergency guardianship petition, but we need documented proof of the fraud and conspiracy. I've got recordings of their planning sessions through the hidden camera. That's a good start, but we need more. Can you return home early and catch them in the act of implementing their plan? We can provide surveillance and record everything for evidence. The idea of walking back into my own house knowing Carmen and Marcus were waiting to ambush me with legal papers and police escort felt terrifying. But it was the only way to expose their scheme and protect other potential victims from Carmen's future predations. What about my safety? Carmen seems desperate enough to do anything to avoid prison. We'll have officers positioned nearby, and you'll be wearing a recording device. The moment things get dangerous, we can intervene. As I agreed to Detective Mitchell's plan, I realized this was the most important fight of my life. I wasn't just protecting my house and money. I was fighting for my dignity, my independence, and my right to make decisions about my own future. Helen always said I was stronger than I knew. Monday morning, I'd find out if she was right. Detective Mitchell arrived at the cabin early Saturday morning with a small team of technicians who helped me prepare for what we were calling Operation Homecoming. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me, Returning to my own house had become a military operation, requiring police backup and surveillance equipment. We've confirmed that Dr. Williams is actually Dennis Williams, a medical technician from Jacksonville who's been creating fraudulent medical records for Carmen's schemes. Detective Mitchell explained while her team tested recording equipment. He's done this at least 3 times before in Florida and Georgia. She showed me photos from previous cases. Frank Peterson in Toledo, whose death I'd already learned about. An 80-year-old man named Robert Chen in Atlanta, who'd been committed to a nursing home against his will before his daughter could prove the medical reports were fake. A widow named Dorothy Hayes in Jacksonville, who'd lost her house and life savings before family members realized Carmen's true identity. Carmen's real name is actually Carmen Elena Rodriguez Santos, Detective Mitchell continued. She's wanted in multiple states for elder abuse, medical fraud, and identity theft. Your son may not know about her criminal background, but he's still participating in conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence against Carmen was overwhelming, but the case against Marcus remained complicated. Detective Mitchell explained that his legal fate would depend largely on whether he'd been manipulated into participating or if he'd known about Carmen's history and criminal intentions. Either way, he's looking at serious charges, she said gently. Fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, possibly forgery if he signed any documents using your information. I spent Saturday afternoon calling old friends and neighbors, people who could testify about my mental competence and physical condition. My neighbor Bob Williams agreed to provide a sworn statement about recent conversations we'd had, including detailed discussions about current events and complex home repair projects. Janet Stevens, the family lawyer who'd helped Helen and me write our wills, confirmed that I'd never shown any signs of cognitive decline during our meetings after Helen's death. Most importantly, I scheduled an emergency appointment with Dr. Stevens for Monday morning, before returning home. He would conduct a comprehensive mental status evaluation that would contradict Carmen's fake medical reports. Sunday evening, I drove back toward Columbus, with Detective Mitchell following in an unmarked police car. The plan was simple, but dangerous. I would return home normally, as if my vacation had ended on schedule. Hidden recording devices would capture whatever confrontation or legal ambush Carmen and Marcus had prepared. Police officers positioned around the neighborhood would intervene if the situation became threatening. Remember, act surprised by whatever they spring on you, Detective Mitchell had instructed. Don't reveal that you know about their plan. Let them incriminate themselves by explaining their actions. As I pulled into my driveway Sunday night, the house looked exactly as I'd left it. Helen's roses were blooming along the front porch, the lawn was neatly trimmed, and warm light glowed through the kitchen window. It should have felt like coming home after a relaxing vacation. Instead, it felt like walking into an ambush. Marcus's car was parked on the street, and I could see silhouettes moving behind the living room curtains. They were waiting for me, probably reviewing their strategy one final time before launching their coordinated attack on my independence and dignity. I took a deep breath, thinking about Helen and the promises I'd made to her about not giving up on life. Then I grabbed my fishing gear from the trunk and walked up the front steps of the house I'd built with my own hands 47 years ago. Carmen opened the front door before I could use my key, her face arranged in an expression of concern that I now recognized as completely artificial. "Tony, thank goodness you're home safely," she said, helping me carry my bags inside. "We need to talk about something important." Marcus appeared from the kitchen, looking nervous and avoiding direct eye contact. "Hey, Dad, how was the fishing?" "Pretty good," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart raced. "Caught a few nice bass. What's this important thing we need to discuss?" Carmen guided me to the living room, where I noticed papers spread across the coffee table next to a manila folder thick with documents. She sat beside me on the couch, while Marcus remained standing by the window, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Tony, we've been worried about you," Carmen began, her voice gentle and caring. "Since Helen died, we've noticed some changes that concern us. Forgetting conversations, getting confused about dates and times, leaving appliances running. We think it might be a good idea to have you evaluated by a specialist." Here it was, the opening move in their carefully orchestrated campaign to steal my life. I forced myself to look confused and slightly defensive, the way they expected a man with dementia to respond to such accusations. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. My memory's fine. I haven't forgotten any conversations or left anything running. Carmen exchanged a meaningful look with Marcus, as if my denial proved their point. That's exactly what we're worried about, she said softly. Sometimes people with memory problems don't realize they're having difficulties. She picked up one of the documents from the coffee table. Dr. Williams has been monitoring your condition, and he's recommended some additional support to help keep you safe. I pretended to study the fake medical report, knowing that Detective Mitchell's recording equipment was capturing every word of their deception. I don't remember seeing any Dr. Williams. See? That's what we mean, Marcus said, finally speaking up. You've had 3 appointments with him over the past 2 months. He's the geriatric specialist that Dr. Stevens recommended. More lies, delivered by my own son with apparent sincerity. I wondered if Marcus actually believed what he was saying, or if he was consciously participating in fraud against his own father. Carmen reached for another document. The good news is that we've found an excellent care facility that specializes in helping people with memory issues. Sunset Manor has beautiful grounds, excellent medical staff, and lots of social activities. You'll make new friends and have support whenever you need it. You want me to move to a nursing home? I asked, letting genuine emotion creep into my voice. Just temporarily, Carmen said quickly, until we can determine the best long-term solution for your care. Meanwhile, Marcus and I will take care of the house and make sure all your bills get paid. You won't have to worry about anything. I looked around the living room where Helen and I had spent so many evenings together, where we'd planned our future and dreamed about growing old together. Carmen was talking about taking it all away from me, imprisoning me in an institutional facility, stealing my independence and dignity, and she was presenting it as an act of love and concern. What if I don't want to go to Sunset Manor? I asked. Carmen's expression became more serious. Tony, that's not really your decision anymore. Dr. Williams has determined that you're not capable of making safe choices about your care. Marcus has been granted emergency guardianship to protect your welfare. She handed me a legal document with official seals and signatures. Emergency petition for guardianship, filed by Marcus Hartley on behalf of his father, Anthony Hartley, diagnosed with early-stage dementia and suffering from cognitive decline that impairs his ability to make reasonable decisions about his health and safety. The papers looked completely authentic. If I hadn't known the truth about their conspiracy, I might have been convinced that my own family was reluctantly taking necessary steps to protect me from myself. The ambulance will be here in an hour to transport you to Sunset Manor, Carmen continued. We've already packed some clothes and personal items. Don't worry. We'll bring more of your things once you're settled. An ambulance. They were planning to have me committed like a mental patient, strapped to a gurney and driven away from my home against my will. The cruelty of it took my breath away. But as I sat there holding the forged guardianship papers, I realized Detective Mitchell had been right. Carmen and Marcus had incriminated themselves completely, providing detailed evidence of their conspiracy on recording devices that would be admissible in court. It was time to spring the counterattack. I stood up from the couch, still holding the fake guardianship papers, and looked directly at Carmen with an expression that let her know the game was over. There's not going to be any ambulance, I said calmly, and I'm not going to any nursing home, because I know exactly what you've been doing. Carmen Rodriguez. The color drained from her face when I used her maiden name. Marcus looked confused, glancing between us as if he was trying to catch up to a conversation that had suddenly accelerated beyond his understanding. I don't know what you're talking about, Carmen said, but her voice had lost its gentle, caring tone. Tony, you're having one of your confused episodes. Maybe we should call Dr. Williams. There is no Dr. Williams, I replied. There's a medical technician named Dennis Williams in Jacksonville, Florida, who's been creating fake medical records for your elder abuse schemes, just like he did for Frank Peterson in Toledo, and Robert Chen in Atlanta, and Dorothy Hayes in Jacksonville. Carmen's mask of concern completely disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. Marcus stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Dad, what are you talking about? Marcus asked. Carmen, what is he saying about other people? He's confused and paranoid, Carmen said quickly. This is exactly the kind of delusional thinking Dr. Williams warned us about. People with dementia sometimes develop elaborate fantasies about conspiracies, but I could see panic in her eyes. She was realizing that her carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling, and she hadn't prepared Marcus for the possibility that their victim might fight back with knowledge of her criminal history. Marcus, your wife is a professional predator who specializes in stealing from elderly men, I said, watching my son's face as the implications sank in. She targeted you through the grief counseling group at Street Marks because you were vulnerable after your mother died, and because you had access to an aging father with assets worth stealing. That's not true, Marcus said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. Dad, Carmen loves our family. She's been trying to help you since Mom died. I pulled out my cell phone and showed him photos Detective Mitchell had sent me. This is Frank Peterson. He died in a nursing home after Carmen convinced his children he had dementia. This is Robert Chen, who lost his house and life savings before his family could prove the medical reports were fake. This is Dorothy Hayes, who was robbed of everything she owned. Marcus stared at the photos, his face growing pale as he recognized similarities to our own situation. Carmen grabbed for my phone, but I pulled it back. You lying psychopath, Carmen hissed, dropping all pretense of caring concern. You senile old fool. You have no idea what you're talking about. Actually, I have a very clear idea, I replied. I know you've been showing my house to appraisers and contractors while I was on vacation. I know you've forged medical records claiming I have dementia. I know you've stolen $12,000 from my bank account and plan to have me committed to Sunset Manor against my will. Marcus was staring at Carmen with growing horror. Carmen, is any of this true? Instead of answering, Carmen ran toward the kitchen. I heard drawers slamming and realized she was looking for something. When she returned to the living room, she was holding my largest kitchen knife. Nobody is going to ruin this for me, she said, her voice tight with desperation. I've worked too hard and come too far to let some paranoid old man destroy everything. Marcus stepped between Carmen and me, his hands raised in a calming gesture. Carmen, put down the knife. Let's talk about this. Talk about what? She screamed. About how your weak, pathetic father figured out our plan. About how we're going to lose everything because you couldn't keep him under control. The pronoun we hit Marcus like a physical blow. For the first time, he seemed to understand that he wasn't Carmen's partner in caring for his confused father. He was her accomplice in a criminal conspiracy. Carmen, did you lie about Dad having dementia? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Of course I lied, she shouted, waving the knife toward both of us. Your father is perfectly healthy, which makes him perfectly capable of ruining our lives if he goes to the police. I could see the exact moment when Marcus realized the full scope of what he'd participated in. His shoulders sagged as he understood that he'd betrayed his own father based on elaborate lies told by a woman who'd been using him from the beginning. Dad, Marcus said, turning toward me with tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry. I thought we were helping you. I thought you were getting confused and needed care. I know, son, I replied, feeling my own eyes fill with moisture. She's very good at making lies sound like love. That's when Detective Mitchell and her team came through the front door, weapons drawn and voices commanding Carmen to drop the knife. She looked around the room like a trapped animal, realizing that her escape routes had been cut off. Carmen Rodriguez, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted assault, Detective Mitchell announced as officers moved to surround her. Carmen dropped the knife and turned toward Marcus with a final desperate plea. Baby, tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them we were just trying to protect your father. But Marcus was staring at the scattered legal papers on the coffee table, finally seeing them for what they really were. No, he said quietly. I'm done lying for you. As the officers handcuffed Carmen and read her rights, she continued screaming about how she'd been trying to help our family. How I was an ungrateful old man who didn't deserve her care and concern. Even in defeat, she couldn't abandon the role of martyred caregiver that had been central to her manipulation. Detective Mitchell turned to Marcus with a serious expression. Mr. Hartley, you're going to need to come with us as well. You're facing charges related to fraud and conspiracy. Marcus nodded, looking older than his 35 years. I understand, he said. Dad, I hope someday you can forgive me. As I watched my son being led away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and determination. Carmen's scheme had been stopped, but the damage to our family relationships would take much longer to repair. Detective Mitchell approached me as the other officers finished securing the scene. "We got everything on recording, Mr. Hartley. Carmen's confession, the threats with the weapon, Marcus's acknowledgement of the conspiracy. This case is going to put her away for a long time." I looked around my living room, which now felt like a crime scene rather than the heart of my family's home. But it was still my living room, in my house, and I was still free to make my own decisions about my future. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we make sure justice is served," Detective Mitchell replied. "And we make sure this can never happen to you or anyone else again." 6 months later, I sat in the courthouse gallery, watching Carmen Rodriguez Santos receive her sentence. 15 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and assault. The judge had added extra time because this was her 4th conviction for similar crimes, and because she'd shown no remorse for the elderly victims whose lives she'd destroyed. Dr. Dennis Williams received 8 years for creating fraudulent medical records and participating in a multi-state conspiracy. His testimony against Carmen had helped prosecutors understand the full scope of her criminal network, but it hadn't earned him much sympathy from the judge. Marcus received 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service in exchange for his cooperation and testimony. He'd also agreed to pay full restitution for the money stolen from my account, plus damages for emotional distress and legal costs. More importantly, he'd begun attending therapy to address the gambling addiction that had made him vulnerable to Carmen's manipulation in the first place. The house felt different after everything that had happened, but not in a bad way. Marcus had moved back in temporarily while he sorted out his finances and worked on his recovery. We spent evenings repairing the damage Carmen had done to Helen's garden, talking through the lies and manipulation that had driven us apart, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been broken. "I keep thinking about how Mom would feel about what I did," Marcus said one evening as we replanted Helen's rose bushes. "She trusted me to take care of you after she died, and instead I participated in a plan to steal your home. Your mother would be proud of how you've handled the consequences," I replied. "Taking responsibility, making amends, getting help for your problems. That's what she would have wanted." Marcus had introduced me to his new girlfriend, Jennifer, a teacher with 2 young children who'd been divorced for 3 years. She was nothing like Carmen, honest, straightforward, genuinely kind without any hidden agenda. Jennifer's 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had started calling me Grandpa Tony and asking me to teach her how to build birdhouses in the garage workshop. Detective Mitchell visited occasionally to update me on related cases. Carmen's arrest had led to investigations in 4 other states, resulting in additional charges and helping other families recover stolen assets. Frank Peterson's children in Toledo had reopened their father's case, and new evidence suggested Carmen might face additional charges related to his suspicious death. "You saved a lot of people by fighting back," Detective Mitchell told me during one of her visits. "Carmen would have continued targeting vulnerable elderly victims if we hadn't stopped her." I'd also become involved with a support group for elder abuse survivors, sharing my story and helping other victims recognize warning signs of financial exploitation. The group met weekly at St. Mark's Catholic Church, the same place where Carmen had targeted Marcus through the grief counseling sessions. "The hardest part isn't the money or property they steal," said Margaret, a 78-year-old woman whose nephew had tried to have her declared incompetent. "It's the betrayal by people who claim to love you. It makes you question your ability to trust anyone." I understood that feeling completely. Even months after Carmen's conviction, I sometimes found myself analyzing people's motives and questioning whether their kindness was genuine or calculated. But I'd learned that healing meant finding the balance between healthy caution and paralyzing suspicion. Helen's memory had become a source of strength rather than vulnerability. I could finally visit her grave without feeling overwhelmed by loneliness and confusion. Instead, I felt grateful for the 38 years we'd shared and determined to honor her legacy by living fully and independently. "She always said you were stronger than you knew," I told Marcus as we finished planting the last of Helen's roses. Turns out she was right about both of us. The house was fuller now, with Jennifer and Emma visiting regularly, Marcus working in the garage on weekends, and neighbors stopping by more often. Word had gotten around the neighborhood about what had happened, and people seemed to check on me more frequently, not because they thought I was vulnerable, but because they'd gained respect for how I'd handled the crisis. 1 year after Carmen's sentencing, Marcus married Jennifer in our backyard, surrounded by Helen's roses and the life we'd rebuilt together. Emma served as flower girl, proudly scattering petals along the path where her soon-to-be stepfather and I had worked side by side to heal our relationship. During his wedding toast, Marcus spoke about second chances and the difference between enabling someone's mistakes and supporting their efforts to change. "My father could have written me off after what I did," he said, looking directly at me. "Instead, he showed me what unconditional love really looks like." As I watched my son dance with his new wife, and Emma dance with both of them, I thought about the lessons Helen and I had tried to teach him about family loyalty and personal responsibility. Those lessons had been tested by grief, addiction, and manipulation, but they'd ultimately survived and grown stronger. The hidden camera I'd installed at Carmen's request was long gone, replaced by a simple security system that helped me feel safe without spying on my own family. But sometimes I thought about that moment when Detective Mitchell had first called it Operation Homecoming. I'd been fighting to return to my own house, but what I'd really been fighting for was the right to remain myself, an independent man capable of making decisions about his own life, protecting his family, and building something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. If you've ever felt vulnerable to manipulation or betrayal by people who claim to care about you, what strategies do you think work best for protecting yourself while still maintaining trust in genuine relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story has taught you something about recognizing warning signs of elder abuse or family financial exploitation, please hit the like button and consider subscribing for more true stories about overcoming life's unexpected challenges. Sharing this story could help protect someone else's family from similar predators, so please don't hesitate to pass it along to people who might benefit from hearing it. Thank you for listening to my story and joining me on this journey from betrayal to healing. I hope it reminds you that even in our most vulnerable moments, we have more strength and resources than we might realize. Take care of yourselves and the people you love, and remember that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom.